Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Voices with Vervaeke. I'm here, and I'm excited to be with Robin Hummel. He reached out to me a while ago. He sent me some very cool stuff. We met off camera and had a very good discussion. So I said, let's have an online recorded discussion. So welcome, Robin, and why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so really I've been for a long time kind of on my own, like interested in the meaning crisis and trying to like really to like find a solution towards it, at least for myself. And that's kind of like how I've been approaching these things.
Mhm.
And I don't know, I've been like already like quite a while ago I had watched like your series on the meaning crisis. And after a while I started to feel like, I should reach out to you and talk about like kind of the stuff that I've very much like figured out, and to see like, like what all, because I've started to notice that like I've been looking into certain things that like people might not usually look into much. And I've noticed like that there's a certain sense of like, I guess, like, I don't know, a lot of spiritual topics, but then it is very much lacking in the more like groundedness of science.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
it's kind of like why I reached out, because I do know like regarding certain things like what they might point towards, but exactly like the actual hard science behind it, no.
Mm.
And
That's
yeah, and a lot of it comes out of like, yeah, my interest in like shamanism and similar practices.
well, why don't we start there? Like, why don't you start? Because you told me some interesting things last time
Yeah.
regarding shamanism in your study, and so why don't we start there? Open it up. You've been studying it, and what are some of the insights you think are worthy of sharing and exploring?
Well, one of the biggest insights really that I've had regarding shamanism, and it comes really from the really like the traditional Asiatic shamanic lens, is really this concept called wind horse,
Hmm.
that is very much like instrumental towards the healing powers of the shaman and the ability to heal. And that's one of the biggest things really that I found. Well, there's another element too, like regarding certain rituals and like old rituals in that one can see in like Indo-European cultures as well, not just Asiatic ones. But um, yeah, I think that's one big thing. And then also like the link between like these the spirits, but then also kind of like, like how we talked about the mind born versus the world born spirits.
Yeah.
Kind of this understanding like with the mind born spirits, like how this links to a lot of what's going on from a Jungian lens as well, regarding like the complexes, these different archetypes that
Nice.
are playing out.
Okay, well,
And
let's do
yeah.
that one at a time. That's good. So let's talk a little bit more about wind horse
Yeah.
and what it means and what, reflective associations you've made with it.
Yeah. Yeah, so regarding wind horse, it comes out of the Bon tradition regarding from Tibet.
Hmm.
It is also in like Mongolia and other cultures as well. And I've recently been um actually like well, kind of told by one older, like he's an elder shaman from the UK who talks a lot to the shamans from the Asiatic tradition. From him I learn a lot. And yeah, in that sense it seems to be a recurring theme, because also the Lakota have like a similar symbol for the same idea of soul flight.
Hmm.
And um it seems to be key in this essence of transcendence, but also the power to heal. And it seems to be very much linked to how in like Buddhism they talk about it, referring it to the subtle energies
Subtle
that
body.
arise.
Yeah,
Yeah, the subtle body, and that the mind sits upon. It's depicted as the mind sitting upon the wind horse as a rider, and kind of these energies arising out of the body that allows one to transcend. But it's also very much linked to awareness and a sense of awareness, of being aware of what is arising, and by cultivating this awareness, being able to kind of like, I guess, like detangle all of these conflicting inner impulses and desires, so that there's more of a harmony within. And this harmony creates more of a clarity and being able to see certain things more clear, and then to connect better to the world. And similarly in Taoism too, like they have similar practices, like how they connect to the Tao.
Yes, Qi.
Yeah.
And then, which I'm familiar with, and then also in the Neoplatonic tradition, there was the akama, the vehicle, the astral body of the soul that helped you move up and down in Anagage. So I think you're right that this, and I've been to 2 conferences now on the subtle body, and in both from people from multiple traditions. And I think this, you're right that this is an important universal, and that it's plausible. I think also that it goes back to shamanism. I think Trungpa has something similar too in his influence by Tibetan Buddhism, so that's not that much of a surprise. So and I think the phenomenology, the idea that the mind somehow rides on it, it somehow emerges or arises out of the body, it harmonizes this way, like, and then it gives you clarity, perception into reality that way. Those are, now there's lots of cultural variations. I'm not trying to say they're exactly the same or anything.
Yeah, it's true. It's like similarly with like the Mithraic mysteries, for instance. There's the similar idea with this ritual that they did. This ritual of purification, where they were doing these breathing exercises, and similarly had this kind of idea of transcendence, of this rising up from the body. And they connected it to communing with the gods in their like a particular cultural lens. But there's like different explanations to it. Like, the Taoists have it that they connect to the Tao. From a shamanic lens, it's kind of linked to like the 3 worlds, and these different spheres, the ancestors, or like this idea of like I don't know, the Jungian term for it would be like the cosmic man, or like this kind of like higher being, like you could, yes, the anthropos.
So well, first of all, I'd like to hear what you think about this. That you rightly said we want to try to connect this to science in some, at least intellectually respectable and plausible manner. What you think about it, and then I'll relate to you sort of what I've gleaned from the conferences on subtle bodies. And there's a similar video that just came out recently that I did with Layman Pascal and Bruce Alderman on this. I'll put the link to that in this video. But what do you think first is going on there? Do you have any sort of
so
speculations? Yes.
So like I've been looking in like regarding to like the mythology and the different like ways how they talk about it from a Jungian lens. And there's certain symbolism that like Jung already in his work pointed towards certain regions of the brain.
Yes.
And I've been digging into that deeper and kind of seeing like what's going on there. And it seems like if you also look like at the symbolism with like what Plato has used, but also different other cultures, what they have used, there's the symbolism of the snake, the animal, the man, or the bird. And these generally, from like what Jung had written, point towards particular regions of the brain that are like associated with it. And it's an association. So I don't know exactly like how true that is, but it seems to be that the snake seems to be, from what Jung had written, linked to the brainstem and the body, so more like the hormonal kind of nervous system side of things, where wait, I have to see regarding like what I had written. Then the kind of like the anima animus, but also like this kind of like bringing together of these opposites, like, you know, like this energy of the wind horse, what seems to be strengthening this connection, and leading to this sense of well, I guess purification and like, you know, these different impulses being better regulated seems to be, from what you wrote and from what I've figured out, seems to be linking to the corpus callosum and the limbic system very much. And from what I've seen, this kind of also points, you know, because there's research done on meditation where it said that the corpus callosum has been involved in bridging these hemispheres together, the left and the right. And I think that's kind of like key in what seems to be going on with regarding to wind horse, but also the anima and the animus, like why when you're working with that it seems to be somehow helping to bridge that to similarly, you know, like how meditation seems to be doing that too, and like, you know, with the man and the bird seeming to point towards the prefrontal cortex according to Jung.
So you think what, making use of Jung, you think what's happening is various parts of the brain are being activated and coordinated, presumably in a relatively unusual manner, or else you'd be experiencing this all the time. So is it the idea is that they're communicating with each other in a new way? And that's interesting because that I mean, that could converge with a lot of the proposals that are coming out of the psychedelic research, where what happens in psychedelics is you get different areas of the brain talking to each other that normally don't, and then you get certain imagery that is being generated in response to that new connectivity. I mean, that's a hypothesis that is definitely being put on an empirical level, and we could test it to see if what's happening. That's interesting. So let's put a pin in that. Let's hold that. This idea of, you know, getting areas to communicate with each other in ways they normally don't. I think there's something right about that. And then it's going to have like psychedelic-like experiences because of that. I'm not saying it's a psychedelic experience, but the thing with psychedelics that's an advantage is you can give somebody a psychedelic in the lab and then run experiments. So you can get experimental data more readily. So when I've gone to these conferences, it's been presented, especially by Charles Stang, as sort of three paradigms by which people are trying to understand the subtle body. So let me just outline the three. One is that the subtle body is a physically real thing, and it represents an unknown kind of energy. And people are talking about that like bioelectricity and things like that, and they're doing studies on it. The second paradigm is the paradigm that the subtle body is socially constructed. There are subtle bodies and they're socially constructed entities, the way we socially construct money, right? And make it be a thing that impacts our lives, even though it has no, you know, independent physical existence or anything like that. And that subtle bodies are social constructions like that we then bind ourselves to, like analogous to money. So the first people tend to emphasize what's similar across all these accounts. The second people tend to emphasize what's different across all these accounts. And then the third, which has been associated with my work, is the idea that what's happening in the experiences of the subtle body is we're having imaginal augmentation. So the imaginal, and this Jung was aware of this because of his relationship with Robin, right, is not imagery that takes you away from perception, but imagery that enhances your perception, so you can pick up on subtle patterns subtle relationships, subtle psychosomatic, I should say, relationships, subtle relationships of coupling between you and the environment, subtle patterns. And then the idea is you get imaginally augmented perception and conception of our embodiment, and and you know this from following my work, is inherently transjective. It's neither subjective nor objective. And this is very interesting because one of the things I was pointing out when I gave my two talks is when people talk about the subtle body, they talk about it as both sometimes subjective and sometimes objective, and they try and actually often get this in between. The imagery, for example, is very often associated with breath. And the thing about breath is we take it in, and of course we breathe it out, and it's this coupled, how we're coupled to the environment. The inner and the outer are coupled together. Wind, breath, spirit, steam, these are all very, very, right? And so my proposal is that you're getting, what happens with the subtle body is you have imaginal augmentation of, so you come into a more direct awareness at a very, fine-grained, detailed, of these otherwise subtle patterns of transjectivity, of dynamical coupling. And when you come into awareness of them such that you can interact with them in a way that can be ritualized, and what I mean by that is outside of the event, right? You gain insight that can be transferred to many different types of situations broadly and deeply. And so it's very powerfully transferable. I mean, that's what happens in Tai Chi Chuan, right? You do these exercises, you're doing the in and the out, the yin and the yang, you're getting this, you get things like music is a common metaphor too, because music is simultaneously subjective, objective. You're getting that and you resonate. And then the idea is, how could you apply this in many different martial art situations, right? And then it becomes ritualized in that way, and it becomes, in that sense, real to you because of its transferability. So to put this all in a sentence, the subtle body, ki, prana, these things, the wind horse, the akama, these are ways in which we have imaginally augmented perception of the transjectivity of our embodiment such that we can properly ritualize it into our lives. So we get a grip on it, we get an image of it that affords us transferring it power, and then you get, that's my proposal. So I take the subtle body not to be a thing, but to be a real relation. It's the discovery and invention, the inventio of a certain kind of affordance for how we can interact with the world, fit ourselves with the world, which helps explain why it improves martial arts, why it helps healing, etc. So that's my proposal for it. And I mean, I'm biased, but I should say that so when I've been with the other groups, what was really interesting is both other groups said, they said, obviously they think their position is true, but they said, we think that even if our position is true, you are right. You are describing a lot of what the phenomena actually is. And they just think there might be something above and beyond it for the other two groups. And I think your proposal and my proposal can actually be linked very well together, because it's all about trying to get these, if you're picking up on these otherwise very subtle patterns, you're making areas of the brain talk that normally don't talk to each other, and you'll get into, you can get into a profound altered state. So that's my proposal. And that's what
I do feel like that a lot of what you've been talking about does seem to really connect to what I've been looking into regarding wind horse too. It's very much linked to the breath and this kind of like coming together of the inner and the outer experience. And from like an alchemical or and also Jungian lens, it really to like the highest degree, it really seems to be pointing towards like when like you have like these different opposites coming together, and from all in an alchemical lens it would be then the rubido stage, and and it's kind of like both this coming together, and wind horse and these symbols seem to be pointing out exactly towards that as well. Also in the Lakota tradition, it is represented by this a square that is half black and half red, and it represents the coming together of these opposites.
Yeah.
And the different energies, like the four energies of the other four horses that represent particular energies, and the same pattern is present also with wind horse, where it is at the center of the mandala with these different animals surrounding it. And it's kind of like this, what Jung also talked about. So it's kind of like a symbol of the self in that sense, the wind horse.
Yeah. And I mean, this is Corbin's idea too, right? That the imaginal, it's not only between the in and the out, it's between the top and the bottom. It's bottom up, top down, in, out, and all of that kind of imagery is typically because it allows you to ascend, right? And so, and I think this is a very powerful and a point that came out in the discussion with Bruce and Lehman, and I think it was Bruce's point, is about, he talked about how subtle this subtle body work understood this way. It can act like a catalyst. It can get other practices that otherwise don't talk to each other very well. It can get them to talk to each other. It bridges between them. It gave, it bridges between the therapeutic on one hand and like the meditative. He was talking about how when you're doing these kinds of practices, you know, they overlap with mindfulness, and you mentioned all the awareness stuff that's coming out, but he says they also overlap with therapy because they help you get really in touch with yourself and with other people in sort of non-propositional ways. So he said that and then they get these two, they allow these two, it's like a catalyst. They get these two things to talk to each other better and work more profoundly.
Yeah, and from my own experience, and also seeing it with other people in the community that I have, because we started to quite a while ago practice qigong to cultivate wind horse. And what we've noticed also is that a lot of these, and that's kind of like more of a personal anecdote than I would say, but what we've noticed is that kind of like this, like trying to strengthen this communication between both also was bringing up anything kind of stuck in the sense of like past trauma, emotions, anything repressed. It brings all of these things up to awareness, and then and it kind of also helps in cultivating awareness. And I think it is because of these different parts of the brain starting to communicate to each other.
That's
and
right.
And I feel like, I don't know. I personally feel I'm starting to feel like that wind horse might be a symbol for this coming together of all these different regions of the brain in some sense, but also this connection to the body and the environment at the same time.
I think that's right. I think that's right. I think that's very good. Like I said, and you made the point, like if you're getting different areas of the brain to talk to each other, then you can bypass, sort of repression mechanisms that have kept stuff out of awareness. You can overcome that sort of body armor, the way people have deadened their body in order to reduce having certain emotions. But I would also emphasize it's different areas of the brain are talking to each other that don't normally. The way the brain and the body are communicating is now also different. What Winckelmann calls the neural axle. But also the way the body and the environment are coupled and working together. Because again, this sense of enhanced perception, enhanced awareness is also increased. And I also think that when people are doing this, especially when they're doing it with other people, there's also the capacity, there's also the chance that they're getting into a kind of flow state too, that is making it like take on a life of its own and move through them like the wind, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, I know what you mean with that. It's I've noticed like there's been these moments of flow state with regarding to that. There's like these particular moments that happen, but it's very much interesting. But what I find also like one thing that I want to point out that is kind of interesting too is that the shamans on a lot of the rituals too that they do, especially when it comes to like soul retrieval, that they regarding their journeys that they do, and they have like a particular narrative and story when they help a client as well, and like a lot of the times it's also in a communal setting, especially in the traditional ways how they do it. But they go in that sense to help the other person to retrieve certain parts of the soul, to restore that, and by restoring that, they restore the life force, the chi of the person, which helps them to cultivate more wind horse as well, because it seems that these particular repressed emotions and states can actually be a hindrance towards this actually being able to have these different parts coming together, even though like once you start to actually cultivate it, that would actually like then start to snowball and help to kickstart it. And I kind of feel like with a lot of the things also that shamans then tell a client afterwards, because the thing is that the ritual is kind of like, in that sense, what they do, they do it normally like either multiple times, or there's something that the person has to do, a ritual, a particular thing that they have to do to keep this up. So it's like not a one-time thing to like resolve any particular issue. And I think like there's in different cultures there's different ways to do it. I know like in the here in Finland, there's shamans that use particular kind of dolls that symbolize something. There's a lot of symbology with that symbolizes this aspect, and then the person has to work with that. And a lot of this is kind of like symbolic, I think, from a Jungian lens, to bring these different like archetypal aspects back for them, and to facilitate this kind of like integration, and in that sense maybe like an integration of different parts of the brain more, and to help them to process certain things, so that this like coming together is facilitated.
Well, so I have two things to say about that. I think that's right. And I would point you to internal family systems therapy, which I've done and gone through, where you're working with parts, right? And you allow them to take on a personality and speak and talk to each other, and then you're basically, what you're trying to do is to reintegrate stuff that has been exiled, that has been kept out of the seat of awareness, and so that lines up very well with that. The fact that the ritual is often done with other people, and this is Urero's work about how narrative allows us to, it puts us in the right way of thinking to pick up on dynamic patterns very readily, especially social cultural dynamic patterns. And so the shaman is getting into this state, picking up, and and the shaman is picking up on the social dynamics of the group that are also affecting the identity and the health of the person. And the narrative is also not only reconnecting, right, the parts, it's also reframing the social dynamics, so the person can potentially be reintegrated more properly back into the community. Because the idea is in several of these things is the illness is not just we divide things up, but for the illness isn't just physical, it's psychosocial physical all at the same time, very much like depression is. Right? You don't just give people a drug. You also have to give them the ritual of therapy, and then you also have to help them reconfigure their social network. And when you do all of that, then you'll actually heal them. And so something very similar is going on, I believe, with the shamanic narrative.
I think so too. And I think that's kind of like the big key in like why it generally works, because it needs these different dimensions to come together, so that then it would work. It's similarly like with some of the older like proto-Indo-European, but also Indo-European rituals that I know about regarding like the Choreos and like the Arctea kind of rituals too. It's like these were also done in communal setting, and they kind of employed like this ritual kind of like death and rebirth symbolism, that then the community would also be able to witness, because they would know about it. So that would change the social dynamics for these people, so that then they would through the ritual see things differently. So it would lead to a shift in perspective on like how they would interact with each other. So that would and similarly, like
I think we're making some excellent connections here. I'm trying to remember. You talked about two things at the very beginning. You talked about wind horse, and then there was something else. There was a second insight you had that you wanted to talk about. Do you remember what it was?
Wind horse and a second insight. I actually don't remember.
I'm not remembering it either. This has been so interesting and involving. Well, I mean, don't try to remember that particular one.
Yeah.
What else about shamanism do you think should be brought out, and people should be made aware of, we should reflect on?
What else? I don't know. I would say one thing that I've really noticed is that I guess, well, yes, there's definitely the communal like aspect to it, which is very important. So it seems, but I have noticed from my personal experience that using it like in combination with like a lot of the Jungian like work that I've been doing on myself, that it has been particularly helpful in resolving complexes and resolving different, I guess, issues within myself, to face them head on. And it's very, these trance journeys are very symbolic in that sense, but they've been able to really lead to a real sense of catharsis, and in that sense also, I don't know, I've started to notice by practicing that and and cultivating at the same time wind horse, it's been very helpful to do so. Especially like cultivating wind horse seems to be very much key in being able to do these shamanic journeys more, I don't know, in a more grounded and integrated sense, and be actually able to do deeper journeys and actually get into these states of mind more. It's kind of like by cultivating wind horse, you're training your brain to by strengthening this connection, so that you can more easily enter into these like altered states of consciousness.
Yeah, I think it's catalytic in that way. And I remembered as you were talking what the other insight is, which was the distinction between mind-generated and world-generated spirits.
Oh, yes.
Yes. And so, and I thought when we talked about that last time, I thought that was also an important thing, because and you were also, you weren't identifying that, but you were talking about that in the context of sort of new shamanism and traditional shamanism.
Yes, true.
And so maybe unpack that a little for us. That'd be great. I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah, so we're regarding what we were talking about like last time. Yeah, so I was talking about like this distinction between like core shamanism, which is like a more modern kind of like branch, you could call it, made by Michael Harner.
Yes.
And then you have like the old a kind of traditional shamanism from, for instance, like the Asiatic tradition that I've looked into a lot. And in the more like recent studies that they have done, and this there has been like communication between core shamanism and traditional shamanism on this. It seems to be becoming clear that like that there's starting to become like this insight into like this distinction between like the mind born, so that what is part of the person, and that what is becoming classified as more world born, like how we came up with that term for those spirits that are part of the natural world, and seem to be pointing towards things that are not linked to the human necessarily, but are intrinsic to the world. So and from a Jungian lens, I would really point with that towards like the collective unconscious, and then really like the deeper patterns of the world that just go beyond just the individual kind of experience. It's very archetypal, very like base collective patterns that are present not just in humanity but in the world at large.
Right, more perennial patterns, perennial problems, invariant features of the environment, things like that.
Yeah.
Right, and so it's sort of the archetypal within and the archetypal without are being linked together in these spirits. And then the mind-born would be more like, you know, like the parts work we were talking about, wrestling with complexes or wrestling with parasitic processes.
Basically,
right,
from like a Jungian and depth psychology lens, that's exactly what that lens regarding like what we're dealing with, these like these mind-born spirits. It's basically in the realm of that. And I've been talking to the shamans about this as well. And with regarding to the mind-born spirits, yes, definitely, that would be they would not all of them, but some would indeed agree that yes, that would be in the realm of like the psychological and what links specifically to the person itself, where there's this kind of practice that they do to cultivate enough wind horse to become aware of these very perennial patterns. Because the thing is, what they have pointed out also to me is that generally we're not aware of these things, and it's only by cultivating wind horse for a very long time that we start to actually become aware of these patterns, these perennial patterns. And these are considered the I guess the more real spirits in some sense, because they are they exist kind of like outside of us, or like outside of our personal kind of like unconscious spheres.
They're more transpersonal, and they represent sort of things outside of our ego consciousness, plugging into patterns in the world that our awareness is typically not picking up on, something like that. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
So that's interesting. And so what is, I think I asked you, but I don't, when we talked last time, but I don't remember. I want to share it. What's the relationship between those two groups? Like the core shamans, the core shamanism, which I take it as set in sort of a modern or postmodern worldview. And then the traditional shamanism, of course, is set in some kind of traditional worldview. So how do they get along well? Do they like each other?
It really much depends. It's like I don't know. I would describe it as like a love-hate relationship, kind of. It's just like I don't know. They're kind of happy that like to some degree that like people are starting to like practice these things, but then they're also very much like about it, because they're kind of like and I very much get it. It's like they because there are definitely people that take on these things that they have learned from the traditional shamans, but then they it gets taken out of the context, and and that's kind of like the biggest thing really that seems to be the issue. And they think, and they really do say that the context within what it is placed, and within in the sense of the tradition, is very important in it for it to work. It's one example also is like particular secret mandalas and mantras, for instance, that they use. There's a particular initiation and how they call how do they call that again? Empowerment that they have from the shaman, or with some of the more Buddhist branches. Really like this empowerment that they have, and this like understanding it within the context of the tradition what this means. And this context actually allows it to actually work, because it's context related. There's like you can't just take it out of the context, and then because then it starts to lose its meaning and its and symbolic kind of like the symbol becomes a bit like I don't know, like more dead and sterile.
Well, that makes sense if it's ultimately transjective in nature, right? If it's co-created by the environment and the mind and the way they're coupled together, that makes perfect sense. And for me, that's the truth in the social constructivist paradigm, that, you know, it's a socially constructed thing. I don't think that's totally the case for a lot of the stuff we've been talking about here.
Yeah.
But I think that dimension is a powerful dimension, and it's real. I think the social constructionists aren't just totally false or right or mistaken. I think they're pointing out that, yeah, that like there's the way in which, you know, because what culture does is it sets up affordances, it sets up transjective relationship, because it shapes the person to the environment and shapes the environment to the people, right? And
Yeah.
like in that, right, certain affordances are generated, and if you lift this out of that affordance network, it's not going to plug in the same way, it's not going to work. So I can totally see that. And,
Yeah.
and so and the thing that's interesting to me, I read a little bit of Harmer's Harner, right? Michael Harner. Yeah.
Michael Horner, yes.
Yeah, his book on becoming a shaman, did a couple of the practices. And I don't know if this overlaps, but one of the things that I found odd is there was a sense there of, yeah, of that this had been sort of taken out of, for lack of a better word, a religious context.
Yeah.
And then that would have presumably altered it in some
Mhm.
fashion. So I'm interested, what do you consider yourself to practice? Do you practice core shamanism or traditional shamanism? You don't have to answer me if you don't want to, but yeah.
In that sense, I don't really practice traditional shamanism nor core shamanism. Really, I kind of do my own particular thing. It's very like Jungian and kind of inspired, like how I approach it. But I
Right.
do like talk to the traditional shamans, and I'm kind of like looking at it from both lenses at the same time. So I'm like looking at it from like a shamanic lens and also from a Jungian lens, and I'm trying to bridge both so that I get like a deeper understanding of what is going on. Because what I've figured is that the Jungian lens is very nice, but the shamanic lens, because I've been looking I don't know, like enough into like mythology for myself, and like a lot of these things, that the shamanic lens has become very useful to look at, because a lot of these figures have been popping up in me for me in these journeys
Right, right,
that I undertake.
right.
And I would want to like bring up one thing from depth psychology here, and it's kind of like this idea that kind of like the I guess the mythological framework that one is in shapes how these archetypal patterns
Yes.
kind of like manifest themselves to one. And the thing is that it's a relationship between like the ego and this mythological frame and the unconscious and these like deeper archetypal patterns,
Mhm.
and like how they it's like it's basically like I don't know, it's like they have a particular like energy and essence and way of like behaving that is generally speaking just something deeper, but then like how it is shaped and like dressed up is very cultural and personal bound. And I
Right.
think that yeah, in my sense, I don't know, I'm somewhat of a mix of like these things in between, mixed with a lot of stuff that I've looked into that kind of like dresses up the what I'm encountering in a particular manner that isn't really, I don't know, I wouldn't say following the core shamanic way of dressing these things up, nor really the traditional either.
Right.
It's
I
kind of
see.
like yeah.
Right, right. So you've taken aspects of the core and aspects of traditional, but you've basically found that the Jungian framework allows you to integrate them better together, and that works better for you as a ritual. Do you practice with other
Yeah.
people as well?
Um, no, I actually practice completely alone. I normally just go very deep into the forest and then just practice alone generally.
Have you ever done or participated in any group rituals around this?
Group rituals, no, I have well, I have actually I have guided some group rituals,
Right,
actually, yes.
right, 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 right.
I've done like some death and rebirth rituals, particularly where I helped people through um well through particular rituals. In one particular case, it was someone that actually had a dream that I recognized as being a death and rebirth ritual stemming from the Neolithic, and I was like, "Hey, that's that kind of ritual." So we did it, and I on the same day, and so I was like, "Let's do it," and I put on my shamanic gear, and then I went there and I guided them through it. And then since then, they've had a lot of like these repressed things start to come up for them, and I've been guiding them a bit through that. That's really like the kind of
So the Jungian, because that what you just did was very Jungian, right? And that's not a criticism; it's an observation. So like one of my criticisms of current people practicing shamanism is something we've been talking about earlier. Like you're not living a hunter-gatherer, you're not living in the natural environment very much. Like you're trying to transplace shamanism into, you know, post-industrial suburban world. It's that. But what I see you doing is you're using Jung as a way of grafting the shamanism onto the modern world, because that's what Jung was trying to do. Modern man in search of a soul, right? That's exactly what his philosophical psychotherapy was trying to achieve. That's very interesting. I think that's very powerful. How long have you been practicing?
I think shamanism, it's been now what, 2 years already, and been regarding like the more like Jungian work, I think it's been a decade. And I've really just first just done a lot of the Jungian work, but at some point I started to actually have dreams about making a shaman drum that was like, I listened to it and I was just like, well, I mean, I guess I'm gonna go do that next, because I was kind of getting stuck at some point, and then I had that, and then I was just like, man, I'm gonna do that, see what happens.
And the shamanism helped you get unstuck. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, very much so. And from that came like all of these things regarding wind horse and and all this kind of knowledge that started to come up, and I was able to connect that to like Buddhism and the 3 doors of liberation, and
Very interesting. Robin, we're gonna have to wrap it up, but I want to give you the chance for a last word. First of all, thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you for having me on, Vervaeke.
Right. Is there anything else you want to say at the end to any people about this? Just parting words kind of idea.
Parting words kind of idea. I don't know. I mean, the only thing that's coming to mind right now is stay windy, how we say in the Fox Den. And if you're interested in more wind horse, maybe you people can leave a comment in this video from Vervaeke, and we can see if we can dive deeper into anything that's interesting, I would say.
Thank you so much, Robin.
Yeah.